Let's talk about, the reforms that we've had announced from Danny Kruger and Zia Youssef of the Reform UK Party about what they're going to do if and when they get elected. Adam Cherry is editorial director at Guido Fawkes and joins us now. Very, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Well, I mean, interesting announcements from Danny Kruger. You know, he went over from the Conservatives and he, alongside Zia Youssef, is speaking. I mean, every single day there's a Reform press conference, usually making the news, but basically saying, well, day one, we'll be ready. Nigel Farage, he says when, not if, when Nigel Farage walks into number 10, I want him to sit the civil servants down and tell them what to do. New civil service legislation, bringing in expertise and advice, but basically putting the elected representatives in charge as opposed to the civil service. What's not to like?
Yeah, I mean, so all of that I think is pretty welcome. So you have a new ministerial code, you have a new civil service code. What does that mean? Well, if you're going to pitch this to the layman, to the voter, you would say this is to enable reform to work their agenda through Whitehall and overcome the institutional resistance that they may face, given that there's a sort of groupthink mentality within Whitehall that may try to thwart their plans. What I was slightly disappointed by, to be honest, was it was pretty threadbare on detail. I mean, you've now actually got Reform and the Tories singing directly from the same hymn sheet on this specific topic. It was only about 3 weeks ago at the Conservative Party conference that they announced that they would cut £8 billion annually. They would save £8 billion by reducing the civil service by about 130,000. You didn't even hear that level of detail from Reform today. It was a bit more vague than that.
I kind of prefer parties to be vague. If they don't have the numbers, don't just make them up.
Well, fine, I suppose there's an argument for that, but Reform do have a broader problem of being light on detail anyway, and this is continuing that trend. You can argue, again, that it's early days, and in fact, they did argue that they need time to refine this over the next 3 or 4 years, and they're inviting people, experts, to join them on that journey. Fine. The broader point is true, I think, like I said just a moment ago, that, look, the civil service is now at over 500,000 in terms of its headcount, which is absolutely gigantic. If you think back to, so that's, since Brexit, as was mentioned in that speech, but also particularly since the pandemic, it has boomed. But has the civil service, has the government machine, does it really work better for you now than it did 10 years ago? Of course not. Of course not.
It seems to have got worse, so more people. But when we talk about the civil service, who do we mean? We don't just mean those people who refuse to go into their offices in Whitehall. We're talking about people in every local council, and how far does this spread?
Well, I mean, I think much of this is concentrated, certainly with Reform's plans today, it's concentrated in the more senior civil servants in London, in Whitehall. In fact, they want to bring back many of those civil servants working either from home or in other parts of the country into Whitehall, so they're all in the same place, and make some savings by closing some of those external office buildings down. Fine. In terms of the overall savings that will be made to the taxpayer, it's a small figure, but nonetheless
but having everyone in one place, they can talk to each other, not a bad thing. And we know that lots of the agencies, when they have moved out of London, they moved to Newport, I think the Office for National Statistics, and they just lose a load of people who say, well, I don't want to up sticks, take my whole family.
Definitely. I think there is a strong argument to be made for that. And the interesting thing here, aside from like I said, no precise figures, but the interesting thing I noticed was they want the civil servants, the senior civil servants, to be directly accountable to ministers. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means you can sack them if they're useless. At the moment, in fact, I was speaking to a former minister just last week who said that this argument that you can't do things in Whitehall is wrong. You can't sack them, but you can move them around. And I thought to myself, a bit odd. You can't sack them, and you think that's fine. You can just shuffle the deck chairs. I mean, if the civil service is exploding to over 500,000, how many times can you do this before you've got too many people doing not enough? So if ministers are actually responsible and can sack those who aren't meeting the mark, then I think that's a good thing.
But again,
absolutely.
But there's two things though. One is like the Elon Musk Doge, that email. Back. Tell us 5 things you've done this week. I've said the story before, and I had an old editor, and he arrived. He said to me, "Hello, I'm X. Who are you? What do you do?" And they would say, "Oh, I'm the deputy picture editor on Londoners Diary." It was like, "So what do you do?" And it's like, I have to basically source 3 photos of famous people a day. Really? That's not a job. Next. You know, but like what? Don't tell me your job title. What do you do? I was like people having Zoom meetings, 45-minute Zoom meeting. What is the purpose of this meeting? What are we going to achieve? If we're not going to achieve anything in it, why are we bothering to have this? And why are you CCing everyone on an email? I mean, the reality is there's a hell of a lot of people who are in civil service jobs doing absolutely sod all day.
Well, exactly. I agree. I mean, we cover this on Guido quite a lot.
Oh, yes,
there
you
are
do.
so many examples. I think we did one last week. There was an example. In fact, it made the national press when the civil service that was revealed in that report published about the Home Office. So they were having listening circles. So everyone sits in a circle and holds hands and thinks about how to thwart government policy because it's too much to bear and it makes them feel stressed out.
I mean, genuinely, but also you're a servant. You don't have to agree with public policy. It's not your job whether you agree or disagree. You're a servant. We need to bring that back in, and absolutely accountability to ministers. I wonder, though, I mean, reform would need such a mandate to be able to get that through. It would be really interesting to see how they could, and how quickly they could get that through and how quickly they could seize control. But if they do have a public mandate, then perhaps a lot more of a moral case for it. Really good to talk to you, Adam Cherry. Do come on again, editorial director at Guido Fawkes. It's coming.